Time has produced some of the most incredible humans to walk the face of this planet we call home. People who've endured the most harrowing ordeals, pushing their body to the extreme. Whether it's plane crashes, abduction, jungle survival, or even medical anomalies, we explore them all. Who are these people? What happened? Where are they now? Join us to find out. Not Me, Not Today podcast.
Hey everyone, it's Leisha and Kenny here, and welcome to another episode of Not Me, Not Today podcast.
Hello, and hello to everyone wherever you are in the world. We just want to say a big thank you to everyone who listened to our first episode. We're so glad you enjoyed it. It was also really cool to hear from you guys, so thank you for your kind words and messages. This just leaves me with one question to ask, and I know it's on everybody's mind. Leisha, what's the story?
Today's episode is about Eduardo and Jayne Valseca. It involves Kidnapping Ransom. There's also been a relatively recent update on this that I felt brought a really interesting conclusion to the story. This edition of Not Me, Not Today contains some violence, so I do want to give an advanced warning. Naturally, some survivor stories are going to be more brutal than others, so I will give a warning before each story as to the potential triggering content we're about to cover. I don't dive into a huge amount of graphic violence in this one, but I'm giving a heads up to the people who would like to skip these ones and focus on the against the element type survival stories. This is going to be a wild ride, so strap in.
That was a fair enough warning. Let's get right into this.
Jayne Rager was born in Silver Springs, Maryland in 1966. That's spelled Jayne, and it'll be an important detail in this story. She was a child actor and starred in commercials. She continued into adulthood, doing predominantly commercials and some soap operas, and she was in one film, Stella, with Bette Midler, but as a speaking extra. Eduardo Valseca was 18 years older than her, an art dealer and the grandson of an ex-newspaper empire baron. The business had closed long ago and there was no large inheritance. The only thing that Eduardo had been left with was an old train car. The name, however, was synonymous with wealth, business and power. Eduardo had been married once before and had 2 children from a previous marriage. However, he was no longer married when he met Jayne in the phone booth of a car park of a restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland in 1992. They instantly fell in love. Eduardo was a passionate man and swept Jayne off her feet. A quote from Jayne was, "We were madly in love and could never even imagine being apart from each other for a second." They married in 1994 and moved to a large family ranch in San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. The place they moved to was a paradise, in their own words. They had a ranch filled with horses, donkeys, Irish wolfhounds, rabbits, and 3 children, Fernando, Emiliano, and Naya. Again, I will include some photos on our Facebook and Instagram of this ranch if you wanted to check them out.
This looks like a really cool place to grow up. It's like the Secret Garden set in Mexico.
It's a dream of a place. Sunshine, 1,000 acres of land, fountains in the gardens, romantic reddish-coloured brick walls covered in ivy or creeping plants and cactus gardens. They even had a train track on the property. They didn't have any video games, they just had nature and outdoor activities. Eduardo showed Jayne the train card he'd been left. Jayne described in an interview that he brought her to the train cart and a man in a white tuxedo with gloves came out with a silver tray of drinks.
Oh.
They subsequently rode it to their ranch in San Miguel, and there were some clips of a home movie they'd made while they were all on the train riding it to the family ranch. Jayne and Eduardo were lovely, passionate, hardworking people who decided to open up their own school after struggling to find a suitable one nearby. They established a Waldorf school with some other parents. Jayne worked in the school and it was her major passion. Eduardo had a slot as a panelist on a local TV show.
What is a Waldorf school?
So I hadn't a clue either what a Waldorf school was. It's an education based on Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy.
Which is what?
Well, apparently they strive to develop people's intellectual, artistic, practical skills in an integrated and holistic manner, emphasizing art and nature in its curriculum. It was built on the ranch just a quarter mile from the house. An average day for the Valsecas was dropping the kids to school, even though on occasion their son would ride one of the donkeys to school, which is the most Mexican thing ever, and I love it.
That's so cool.
Jayne would tend to the animals and the horses, and they also bred Irish wolfhounds. I saw Jayne mention in one interview that when the kids were small, they wanted to take the puppies in for show and tell because it was super exciting. But the puppies were too young, so she wouldn't really let them. But they had loads of friends, and they were really involved in the community. Jayne learned and spoke perfect Spanish, as did the children, so they were very much included and known. "Life was pretty perfect," was another quote I found from Jayne. On the day of June 13th, 2007, it started out as a pretty typical morning. They dropped the kids to school in their family Jeep a quarter of a mile from the ranch. It was a pretty rural road, barely 2 cars wide, no tarmac, red bumpy dirt road with sparse plants lining the sides and up the middle, tire tracks worn into the dirt. They were singing songs on the way and pulled into the car park. When they arrived, Jayne noticed that there was a small compact car that she hadn't seen before, and there was a man sitting inside with a khaki-coloured fisherman's hat and glasses. Jayne walked the children indoors and actually asked at reception if they knew who the man in the car was and if he was being helped. The staff said they didn't know who he was, but he could just be waiting for someone. Jayne said that she thought nothing more of it, and when she left to return to her car, she caught his eye and smiled at him. He smiled back, and she hopped into her car and they went to return to the house. Almost instantly, Jayne and Eduardo noticed the man in the compact car pull out behind them and start to follow their car. Which was pretty weird because it just leads back to their house. So they sped up, and so did he. A pickup truck pulled out and drove alongside them. The compact car peeled away and took a parallel side road. Now they're freaking out and driving quickly up their lane, hoping to make it back to the house, but the compact car pulled out in front of them where the lanes rejoined and slammed on the brakes.
Oh my god, what is going on?
Eduardo jammed his foot on the brakes and almost instantly the car from behind smashed into the back of them, pinning them between the 2 cars.
Trapped.
A man got out, came towards them with a hammer in one hand and a gun in the other. He hit Eduardo in the face with the hammer after smashing the window. Eduardo screamed, which terrified Jayne. A second man tore Jayne from the car. She reached out to steady herself, cutting her hand on the barbed wire fence that ran along the side of the road. The first thing she said was, "Please don't kill me, I have 3 children." The masked armed men ripped Eduardo out of the Jeep, then threw them both into the back of a waiting SUV in front. Men that were waiting inside the SUV put pillowcases over their heads and tightly bound their wrists and ankles with duct tape.
Can we just take a moment to imagine this? What would be going through your mind?
I just couldn't fathom it. Ooh. Well, Eduardo was blood spattered and hysterical in the back on Jayne's lap. This was starting to really piss off the captors, and they threatened him that if he didn't shut up, they were going to give him another one. She could feel the blood running down his arm and could hear him but couldn't see anything because, like Eduardo, she had a sack over her head. She didn't know where on earth they were going, so she tried to remember the turns that they took. Also, a wild fact here, but their son Emiliano was going on a school trip that day and said that the bus that they were on was behind a Jeep that drove wildly in front of them and screeched out, taking a turn onto a larger road. At the time, he had no idea that it contained his abducted parents and just thought it was some crazy reckless drivers.
That's so crazy.
I know. Well, eventually they stopped the car and the door opened and Eduardo was yanked out of the car. Jayne lifted the pillowcase just in time to see a car that contained Eduardo speed off. She was bound in the car. She threw herself over the seat onto the footwell and opened up the door. She got out and hopped in her flip-flops to the highway. An elderly man stopped to help, but only had a machete and no phone.
As you do.
So then she tried to flag down someone else with a phone to call the police, but found that no one would stop, and in fact they sped up.
I was just thinking then, why wouldn't anyone help her? But you can't neglect the fact that she was there at the side of the road, battered, bloodied and bound.
Yeah.
She was also standing with a man who happened to be wielding a machete. That would be quite the sight for anyone passing by.
To be honest, I can't say I'd stop either, really. I'd probably also speed up and get my butt out of there.